We're going to be in lesson 15, looking at the last part of chapter 6 this week, but we ended last week with that question, if you'll recall. Why do you think, of all the different miracles, that the feeding of the 5,000 is in all four? Why would the Lord want that particular miracle recorded in all four Gospels? I don't have an answer for that, by the way, but I'm just curious if you guys have any thoughts about that, why that seems to be the standard across all four Gospels. Any thoughts?
I've got an idea. First off, it was an object lesson to show that Christ can provide.
Okay.
But I think it was also so that we could see that he thinks of the details. He sees that these people were hungry, and so he said, let's feed them. And he was showing his disciples that he is sufficient to feed them.
Okay.
So that's why I'm thinking, and that was the sufficiency through all the Gospels is pretty much key. It's like I'm it. And if I'm not mistaken, just before to just after it, he talks about himself being the bread of life, and that his blood is the drink of life, basically.
When he talks about the bread of life, it's just after what we're going to look at tonight.
Okay.
Right? The end of John 6.
Yeah.
Where he says, you came looking for bread. I'm the bread of life.
Exactly.
And that's where he talks about that. And then a little bit later on, even he talks about drink my blood, eat my flesh.
Exactly.
That all comes in there in John 6 as well. Yeah. So good on that.
Thank you.
Yeah. I like that. Other thoughts?
I think it serves all of their themes of the different Gospels. And I went through that last week, but
yeah,
it serves the narrative of his kingship, that he's got sovereignty over any situation. And for Matthew, for Mark, it's his servantness. He came not to be served, but to serve. For Luke, it speaks to his humanity. He's compassionate. He's a co-sufferer. And he took compassion on these people and then did something about it as a model for our life as humans in his path, in his footsteps. And then for John, his divinity, kind of a hand in hand with his kingship, but just the sheer mastery of creation that, such a miraculous occurrence, nobody would have even thought of going about it that way. And it does it like it's nothing. And I think all four themes kind of converge on the same event and intertwine with each other that way.
Yeah. And so, you came at it from a different angle. And I remember you talking about that last week, but it converges with where John is, right? It shows that Jesus fulfills all the needs. He's all that we need.
Exactly.
He is it.
That's it.
So you can understand why this would be the pinnacle of the miracles, right? Because in one miracle, well said, you get it all. What?
I think it would have to do a lot also with, Jesus performed miracles all throughout his ministry, but this one here, some of those miracles could have been faked by other people, okay? But this miracle was witnessed by, they're saying, someplace close to maybe 20,000 people. So there could be no doubt on this one. This was a complete and absolute miracle that was performed by who he said he was.
Okay, so you go with the idea of the objectiveness of the miracle. That others might have been, a few saw it, but this one you couldn't argue it. Okay, that's good. I get a head shake to my, well, you don't know where you are on my screen. So, Mr. New Braunfels, what's the head shake for?
Because I think when I take a look at this, I'm going to land in your boat or Larry's boat more than the two well-spoken gentlemen who started. And here's why. I agree with what it is the two well-spoken gentlemen said. But if I want to hit all of those marks, I'm going for Lazarus's resurrection. That one is going to be more powerful, and it's going to hit all of Trent's notes and all of the first notes. But Larry is going to be right on target for the sheer number of witnesses that are present, because Lazarus is the epitome of everything that Jesus is in charge of. And it completely answers and addresses each of the themes of the book's writers. So I'm going to be in Larry's boat if I've got to be in a boat. But I'm also going to be. This is a question I'm going to ask the Lord once we get in His presence to say, how come that one? Because I don't know.
I think also tying on to what Larry says, it's not to go with the number of eyewitness accounts tied to the. Consider that the Gospels weren't written the next day; they were written several years later. So it's a matter of this is an obvious inclusion as part of testimony. You know that you, the reader, have heard this story because people that of that time, you've heard this one. I'm absolutely including this because it really is that important.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of echoes a little bit there what you're saying about what I preached on Sunday from 1 Corinthians 15, right? Because there were people who had seen him. They were still around, and they could give you the thumbs up on that. So, well done.
Somebody might wonder about a gospel that didn't include it.
Yeah, there you go. That's good. I like that. Well, so Preston, yeah, we're probably going to be in line with you asking the Lord about a lot of these things when we get there. Of course, we shall see him as he is because we'll be like him. So maybe we'll just have it kind of downloaded into us in our glorified bodies, which would be pretty cool too. Well, with that, we come to Jesus walking on the water. And it's not the entire lesson for tonight, but it's the lion's share of this lesson for tonight. So Mark 6, let's look at verses 45 through 52, just to get this thing rolling. I hope it doesn't bother you guys. Sometimes I ask questions I don't have answers to. I hope that's not a problem. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. And sometimes when I do have an answer, people don't like them. So I think it's okay to have the really super open-ended questions. All right, here we go. Mark 6, starting verse 45. Immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he sent the multitude away. When he had sent them away, he departed to the mountain to pray. Now when evening came, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. Then he saw them straining and rowing, for the wind was against them. Now about the fourth watch of the night he came to them, walking on the sea, and would have passed them by. And when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed it was a ghost and cried out, for they all saw him and were troubled. But immediately he talked with them and said to them, "Be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid." Then he went up into the boat to them, and the wind ceased. They were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure and marveled, for they had not understood about the loaves, because their heart was hardened. And so you get the scene here is that the feeding of the 5,000 is done, and Jesus basically sends the disciples away right away. He sends them away. And John's gospel, in his account of the feeding of the 5,000 at the very end, talks about the fact, and we touched on this last week, that they thought he maybe was the prophet from Deuteronomy, and that if they didn't get lost, then essentially they were going to try to forcibly make him the king. And so you had this political uprising kind of thing going on. So he's like, let's get out of here. Let's go now. And so they left. And so we see that Jesus himself, it says that he sends them away, and then he sent the multitude away. So we don't really know how he did that, but they were gone. So, and then once they're gone, it says that he departs to the mountain to pray. So that's kind of where we start. This has always been a great discussion topic about Jesus and prayer. What may be some reasons that Jesus would go off by himself at this point to pray? What would be the reasoning for that, to pray at this point, do you think?
Well,
Go ahead.
he just lost John the Baptist, his cousin.
Yeah.
And even though he was totally God, this was a family member. And I would think that his humanity was coming into play, and he wanted to touch in with his father to make sure that where he was going, I think. I don't know for sure, but I know that for me, sometimes I need to touch bases, to make sure that I'm still going where I'm supposed to be going. Not that he didn't know or that he wasn't fully God, but there are times when his humanity seems to be more than his deity. I don't know. I'm just kind of like talking with my mouth open.
Well, no, where you're at is kind of interesting, because what we saw last week is that he had sent the 12 out,
Yeah.
right? And while they were gone, we find out about John the Baptist dying,
Right.
and then they come back, and he's like, "We need to go off by ourselves." And so they go off by themselves, but they can't go off by themselves because the multitude is there. So we've gone through this, and it's taken us 4 weeks, but we go from sending the 12 to John dying to them coming back and then them going off and the feeding of the 5,000. There's been no break. There's been no respite through that whole time, right? And so now he sent them off. We spread something that was a fairly compressed time period over 4 weeks.
Right.
But so your point is, he needed time with the Lord. He needed to reload.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
All right.
I was thinking.
Okay.
His humanity still needs to rest,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's
Yes.
been-
but his humanity needs to be nourished and rested.
Say that again. You're breaking up a little bit.
His humanity needs to rest.
Mhm.
Okay. I was just making sure I wasn't breaking Chris up when he was talking. When I'm in charge, I'm good.
So,
Kurt?
same wavelength, I think, as John and you. I believe that every once in a while you see this, he goes off and he's with just him and God.
Mhm.
And I think he needs his next connect without anybody else around. He's got to get his next marching orders. Those two, or three, Holy Spirit too, need to get the next move figured out just between them and or understood. And it's a lot easier if he doesn't have people around.
No distractions.
Okay. All right. Other thoughts?
Well, I think back and go ahead.
I kind of have another angle at it, and I may be way off base, but if you think about it, all of the people that were there when he fed the 5,000, they were pretty much on the same lines as his disciples. They knew that he was a miracle worker. They knew that he could perform miracles, but yet they weren't grasping the effect that he was God. And maybe he went to pray for them to understand what really took place, that this miracle, yes, it was a miracle, but it come from the God of the universe. and they just weren't grasping that point.
Okay.
They knew he was a miracle worker, but they just weren't grasping the point that who he really was.
They weren't with him. He was praying by himself.
Right.
No, Larry's saying that he went to pray for the 5,000 people.
Yeah,
so
when
that
he fed the 5,000,
that's who he
they
is.
just didn't get it. They knew, yeah, he performed a miracle,
Miracle worker.
but they were just following him so that he would feed them again, basically.
And indeed they
At
did.
least that's what it says in John, or yeah, I think it's John.
They busted it across the lake. So yeah, they didn't get it at all. So I hear what you're saying. So you're kind of going with the idea that we see Jesus in the high priestly prayer in John 17 as he's praying for others, which is not that's not out in left field at all, because I think he certainly was doing that for sure. Okay, all right, I'm with you now. I'm tracking.
Well,
Anybody else?
I've got yet another angle coming out of Matthew chapter 6. When you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets. And then when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by men. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. So I think that's from the Sermon on the Mount, right before the kingdom prayer, or what we used to call Lord's Prayer.
Right.
So, and at least some aspect of it could be him living out the teaching he gives to others. You know, even if he doesn't do it as a, hey, I'm going to do that thing I told you about, go away now example. It's just is living by example, living out the example that he teaches.
That's good.
And then he would have explained that to them later, sufficiently that they would have included that as a noteworthy item.
As you say that, Trent, what kind of starts to resonate in my head a little bit too is, the prayer that he would have with God the Father probably would scare the sandals off the disciples, right? I mean, because if we truly are speaking to the Father, we're speaking in authentic, communication, that probably was some pretty heavy praying that went on. I mean, they couldn't handle the truth when he did tell them the truth. And so God the Father and God the Son, it could be some pretty high-end praying. And yeah, he needed to be alone. So from that perspective, because you right when you guys, because this is what I'm thinking of, Trent, when we go by ourselves to pray, it gets real. It's not the flowery stuff that we do in front of each other.
Right.
It's the base level prayer, right? The fears, the struggles, the praises, but the real stuff. Sometimes that we won't pray in front of people, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Because I don't think I've ever told God in front of everybody else that I was mad about something, but I'll do it to him personally, right?
I'm thinking of Moses, and how his breath was taken away when he saw the burning bush, and he was just like first curious and then realized, oh my Lord, I'm in the presence of, and then when he got spoken to, he thought he was going to die.
Take off your sandals.
Can you imagine if we were eavesdropping on that conversation? We would probably to this day, even it's all we know, we'd still drop down on our face and have our breath be taken away and just like, just not at a loss for comprehension.
Well, going back to something that Chris said too, because I think this is vital. I mean, he is just being spent physically by all these people, right? I mean, it spends. And you think about when you pray and you spend time with the Lord, that you may still be tired, but you're refreshed. And he's with God the Father. He's with the Father. And so, yeah, what Chris is talking about is that, as you were talking about that, the positive effect of that is his power and energy
Exactly.
flowing back into you, right? So, I mean, there's some value to that as well.
I mean, it's also an act of humility. Think about feeding 5,000 men plus all of their entourages. You know,
Right.
that should be a triumphant moment. And indeed, they wanted to make him king on the spot. He
Yeah.
says, no, I'm going to go disappear for a while.
Yep.
Yeah, and sure, there's all the higher pragmatism of his ministry, and now's not the time, and everything that goes into that. But just simple on its face. No, I'm not here to be important that way. I'm gonna go defuse this situation by getting out of here for a while and giving credit where credit really is due.
Right on. Right on. Yeah. I like that. Well, like you said a few minutes ago too, it's modeling what he's teaching.
Yep.
And lots of times that doesn't work. I mean, guys, don't ever be frustrated if you try to model Christian behavior in front of people and it just goes nowhere. I mean, lots of times people don't get it on the first, second, 15th, 32nd try. But, you know, if you're saying it and you're modeling it, you know my favorite, maybe you don't know my favorite, one of my favorite passages is Galatians 6, 7 through 9. You know, grow not weary in doing good, for in due time you will reap if you don't lose heart. So it's the continual teaching and demonstrating that people will hopefully one day catch on to. So Jesus taught it and then he showed it, and he taught it and he showed it. Because you know those weren't the only two times he did that.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. All right, so there's been some debate about the place names in this, and I just put this here. Guys, sometimes I put stuff just because it seems like it matters to the scholars. I don't think it really matters to me a whole lot, but they get into the place names and they're like, was he there? Was he there? Was he there? Basically, the best that I can figure out is the feeding of the 5,000 was kind of like at 2 o'clock. If you're looking at the Sea of Galilee, it was about at 2 o'clock. All right. And Bethsaida, where they're heading, is at about 1 o'clock. Now, what's interesting is John, if you go back and look at your notes from last week, John had said that they're going to Bethsaida. But what you need to understand is that there was the town of Bethsaida, and then there was this area around it called the plain of Bethsaida, right? And you guys are familiar with that. I mean, sometimes you have a region, right? And then there'll be a town called that name. But then there's a larger region. So that's kind of the idea that we're going through here. And so it looks like they came in about 2 o'clock on the Sea of Galilee. And the guys were really just going to go from like 2 o'clock to 1 o'clock. It wasn't that far that they really were going to travel. But they ended up getting caught by probably which was a nor'easter. And it basically blew them across the Sea of Galilee to about 9 or 10 o'clock on the sea. So they really got blown off course. And that's kind of what seems to be going on here. I think it's important though too, that at least in my reading of it, and I don't know if you guys have another translation, it really wasn't a storm. It was just a lot of wind.
Yeah.
But it was whipping the sea up pretty good. All right. So I mean, we get this sense that, you know, it's the storm on the sea, and some people were like, well, it was a miracle that Jesus could see him out there. No, it might have been a clear night, but it was just really windy. But he's up on the hill looking down at the sea. If the moon is shining, you could see the guys out on the ocean, on the lake, you know, 2 miles away. You could see those guys paddling, right? So I mean, we need not over spiritualize some of this stuff sometimes. Sometimes it's just reporting the mechanics of the situation, right? So imagine, if you will, he's on the mountain, they're out on the sea. They should have gone, you know, half a mile and been in, and instead they're out in the middle of the lake now. And it's you guys may already know this. The Romans had 4 watches, the Jewish people had 3, and I've got them listed here. They're in the 4th watch, so this is somewhere between 3 and 6 in the morning. Guys had to be wiped out, right? I mean, they had to be wiped out. And they're out there rolling against this, well, it couldn't have been a nor'easter. Well, I guess it was. It was nor'easters blowing them to the west, and they're trying to curl back into Bethsaida. and they're not making it. They're paddling as hard as they can, and they're going the wrong way, is essentially what was happening. So it says in verse 48, now about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea and would have passed them by. So what do you think? They say that's kind of weird wording. Why do you think that wording is the way it is? He would have passed them by. Any ideas on that? Why Jesus would have walked out there and then walked on by him? Which, by the way, may not be the word. What do you think? Thoughts?
Well, he's walking on water, so his laws of physics or gravity are not affecting him right now.
Indeed.
The guys are struggling and straining against this wind, which is blowing them off course. He's able to walk against the wind and not be affected by it. So while they're struggling to go forward, they're actually going backwards. He's walking forward and passing them.
Okay. So you're just looking at it strictly logistically speaking.
Yep.
Okay. Then that may be it, truthfully.
The Amplified says he acted as if he would intended to pass them. So it's a little bit different.
So why would he do that? What would be the purpose if that is accurate, which I've heard some of that conjecture, why would he act like he was going to pass by?
Testing their faith to see if they're gonna recognize him and reach out and ask him to help them.
How often, and I like that answer, testing their faith, if they recognize him. How often is your rabbi out walking on the sea?
That's who.
I mean, that's,
That's
I think you're solid on what you're saying, but I mean, that's a lot of faith. I mean, when's the last time you saw the rabbi out on the Sea of Galilee? Walking. Ever?
See Bruce and Conan.
I actually think that's the theme behind the whole incident is the testing of their faith. He just fed 5,000 people with a very small quantity of food. And he then left them. And now he's coming back and he's looking at them and saying, well, let's see how well they do. And it's like a teaching moment, you know. I'm just going to walk on by and I'll get on the other side, and when they finally get here, I'll turn around and say, "What kept you so long?" You know. But they spot it, and now that becomes a teaching moment. Do they, like Scripture says that they thought he was a ghost? Well, that shows there's still superstition in their hearts.
They thought he was a ghost.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
They saw him, and instead of recognizing him, they were frightened. And so, it speaks to me. How many times have I gotten frightened when I should have been trusting?
Okay. Yeah. You and me.
Because our minds work to make sense of things we don't understand
Yeah.
or not. So it's been said that when the Pilgrims came to America, the Native Americans didn't see the ships because they'd never seen anything like it. They couldn't even make sense of it. They just saw these kind of supernatural people out there in the water. So they're trying to make sense of it and turn it into a ghost because they've not seen him do something like that.
That's the only thing that makes sense to them, in other words.
I think so. I think that's what's being conveyed. If you look forward in 39 or 49, where it says they thought it was a ghost. And so it seems like he's giving them an opportunity to see, have a new encounter, have a new experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, just in a kind of a playful way, I would totally mess with people that I was hanging out with. And just act like I'm going to walk by them, just, these are your buddies, these are your people, and they've never seen you do this, and they can't do it. And you have that intimacy to do it. It's like the perfect time to go do that and give them an opportunity to react. And then you have an opportunity to respond in love and be like, hey guys, it's okay. It's just me. I don't think he was just uptight dude all the time.
Oh, no. And you know, I think you know, to your point, what I've sometimes thought about is, you know, we have the sense of him walking with purpose across the lake, and I've got this sense of him kind of strolling along with his hands clasped behind his back, whistling a
Yeah.
little tune, right?
Exactly.
Just to see if they even take notice.
Exactly.
What's going on?
They're
I've had that
exhausted.
thought before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it says also that they were trying to, they were struggling
Yep.
against the wind and the waves, so they're trying to save themselves. And then they see Jesus walking on the water and going, what the hey?
Mhm.
I don't know what's going on here, but you look like a ghost and I am just totally terrified. We don't know what to do. Do we count on ourselves saving us? Or do we look at Jesus, who we think is a ghost, walking on water and say, hey, I'm here. You know, it's okay. And just to see how they would react. Like we had said before about, do they trust in themselves or they trust in Jesus?
Well, you know, I've heard people teach this before, and they beat the disciples up, and they're like, "Well, how could you think it was a ghost?" But to what you both are saying is they see this, and it's impossible.
Exactly.
It's impossible. This is not possible. So the only thing that makes sense is Jesus must have died or something, and this is his spirit walking on the water, which we in our first century Jewish minds could embrace. So yeah, we can embrace that, but not this. Right?
Well, and then you have to throw into the mix, it's between 3 and 6 a.m., right? So it's still kind of dark,
Yeah.
but kind of that twilighty, maybe, you know? And they've been out there strenuously exercising for hours, which means they may be, you know, did they eat? Did they drink? Are they getting a little, you know, delirious? Are they, you know, what are they seeing? Are they doubting what they're seeing because of their physical state, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you throw that in the mix too.
Because you'd be exhausted just naturally. Like I've been
Exactly.
teeping houses, and that's hard to stay up past two.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh yeah, 100 rolls. We hit them with 100 rolls. And just to stay up that late is hard, but then to stay up that late, if you guys have ever been in water on a boat or something, it's exhausting.
Yeah.
To maneuver some craft in the wind and the waves.
Well,
Pastor,
sorry.
Hang on a sec. Go ahead.
you know, he was spent that time after the feeding the 5,000 praying.
Right.
Well, he's just getting back from praying.
Right.
So you know, you were kind of asking, well, what do you think Jesus was up to? Or what do you think, why was he just walking right on past? I don't know, but he just got done praying a lot. So he probably was very energized about all that. And he's kind of just doing his God thing right now. I mean, he's in the God thing. He just does this huge miracle. Here he is, another miracle, walking on water. It's like he's preoccupied thinking about something else. And, you know, I'm sure he knew they were there, but maybe, you know, he's just into being God right then. And he's on a mission to go to the other side for, maybe that's where he was supposed to end up anyway. And they just happened to yell at him, hey, by the way, help.
See, that's an interesting tack. It's an interesting tack. All right. We're gonna hit that a little bit more. Trent.
First, I was going to point out that these are 4 professional boatmen and 8 average Joes, so they were probably a floating clown show anyway, you know, with or without the wind. So, and then, yes, they've been up all night after being up all day, after going all over all the villages in the area. Like, they're probably in various stages of delirium. But the other thing I was going to throw in, I did a little Bible nerding with my app here, looked at the Greek, and it's ethelen paralthein autos. That's he intended to pass by them, but especially the second word is from para and erchomai, which means to come near or alongside, or it could be to approach, or it could be to go by or to neglect. So we usually go with the pass by, but it's just as easily he intended to approach them. And like I said, they're a floating clown show who are already exhausted and delirious. They thought all kinds of things, but he intended to come. I think that he intended to come to them. We've just gotten kind of a weakened translation through the years.
Yeah, to your point that the original language behind that kind of can either mean to pass before or to pass in view of, right? There's an intentionality to that.
Or approach.
Yeah, I'd say, pass before. So, yeah, that's certainly the possibility there. I like kind of what Kurt's talking about, the thought that they were going to be okay. They were going to be okay. He could have gone on, but because they did call out to him, right? He came close enough, because if he really just wanted to go over to the other side, he could have bypassed them altogether, right? He could have, I don't know, right? But he came close enough so that if they did notice, right, then there you go. So I'm not sure the intentionality of it. Trent, to your point, I think sometimes that we can see the weakening of the wording once you come from the original language into the English and so forth and so on, as far as that's concerned. I think that the answer, we're going to see the answer at the end of the miracle. What's going on here, okay? And I think it's going to get really close to where Kurt was banging the drum. So let's keep going, because I think you'll see it here in just a minute. So he says, "It is I," and some people want to kind of imbue that with a real Exodus 3 kind of "I am that I am" kind of thing, and it may be there, but it seems more like he's just saying, "Be of good comfort. It's me. Don't get freaked out. I'm just Jesus." Now, this is where Peter calls out in Matthew. And he gets Peter out of the boat. Peter walks and falls and, sinks in the whole 9 yards. Only Matthew has that. I'm not spending any time tonight about Matthew's version of that. This has been preached and taught ad nauseum. So if you guys want to talk about it some other time, we can do that. But, there's definitely a teaching moment and a faith exercise with Peter. I don't think there's any doubt about that, but only Matthew includes that. What's interesting, though, is when Jesus climbs into the boat, it's been discussed that may be a second miracle. And I'm not going to stretch this, but it very clearly says when he stepped into the boat, the sea's calm, right? The sea's calm. Maybe there's a lesson there as well. And then John actually says in John 6:21 that they are immediately with the other side, which I've always thought that was kind of an interesting thing, that as soon as he got in the boat, it's like, boop, they were in Gennesaret. I mean, do not pass go. They were there.
Exactly.
And so it's been said that perhaps is even a third miracle that's part of that. But we don't want to lose what a couple of you guys have said. We don't want to lose the teaching moment in the midst of, is this a miracle? Is that a miracle? Is this a miracle? Is that a miracle? So with that in mind, let's think about what it says at the end of this passage. I want to read it again, because this is kind of where Kurt was, I think. It says, "Then he went up into the boat, and the wind ceased, and they were they were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure and marveled, for they had not understood about the loaves, because their heart was hardened." So the first question actually looks back at last week, but it speaks to this. What don't they understand about the feeding of the 5,000? What did they miss in that miracle? You guys have kind of poked at it tonight. What did they miss in the whole thing?
Well, they may have been able to see that Jesus is deity, but they didn't fully understand it. They didn't internalize it and make it their focus.
Okay.
I'm brought back to Sunday morning service when the singer came up and began to sing praises unto God. the intention and intent of his voice was unmistakable. He was committed. I don't think they were fully committed yet.
Okay.
And that they were coming around, they were seeing it, but they're still, and I think that sometimes we, even in the midst of our love and adoration for Christ, always have a, well, maybe, you know, that he wanted to be done with the maybes. I am who I am.
Okay.
And this was an opportunity for them to see him completely as who he was.
Okay. All right.
Now, it was not just the miracles and the things he was doing. This was a completely impossible thing that has never been done before or since. And I think that that's the teachable moment. That was the moment that they began, they internalized it and owned Christ as Christ.
When?
When they were saved, when Jesus came in and says, "Hey guys, calm down. It's only me." At that point in time, they were now on an intimate level. If I'm,
Yeah, I'm tracking.
okay, so they were actually rescued by him. They thought they were going to not make it.
Well, I don't know that you're probably overstating that a little bit. I don't think they were. I don't think they didn't feel like they were in a life endangering situation. They just couldn't get to shore. But certainly, when he came into the boat, there was that calming that happened. Right? They saw him walking on the water. But go back up a little bit to where you were at, because I think this is where the pivotal question is. You made a very strong point that they recognized him as a miracle maker.
Exactly.
They recognized that. They recognized the miracle of the bread, right? They saw it.
Right.
Whether there's been some question about whether the crowd even had a feel for how this bread got to them. Right? There was a sense that they may have missed the entire miracle, in other words. But the disciples couldn't miss it because they were the ones tasked with distributing it. It was happening in their hands. They had to see it. Okay. Go ahead, and I'll come back to you. Go ahead.
I think, this is me, I think these apostles were in the boat. This all just happened. I think they're arguing amongst themselves about what in the heck happened. And they're all trying to put their take in on what it was. And I don't think they solidified what had happened yet. And they were arguing, I'll bet you, trying to get a grasp on how this happened. Was there a chance that the food came from somewhere else? Did Jesus really, produce this food, or whatever? I mean, I think they weren't all on the same page. I think that's what this is trying to say. Their hearts were hardened, so they weren't there yet.
Okay, well, but yeah,
I love that they had that much energy at 4 a.m. That's mind blowing. That's mind blowing.
Yeah, I don't know that at that point there was a lot of complaining going on, but I like the mindset. They might have been troubled in their own minds, and maybe before they got out in the middle of the lake and they couldn't get back.
I mean, I've done some hard things with people late at night, and we just get quieter and quieter. We're not debating at 4 in the morning.
But I like the fact that you're grabbing onto the harden of the heart, and they weren't. And you guys both said this. They weren't there yet. They weren't there yet.
Yeah.
They're just more arguing about what they all saw and trying to put it together in their own minds, that they just lost the whole little big picture. That this is God doing his thing and this is me. And it's not just that miracle.
Right.
It's more than just miracles. All the miracles. And they're just still trying to identify the miracle, but they missed the whole enchilada, you know, as far as who God is and what he's doing there and where he's at with him and God.
Yeah, see, you guys have both said that, and I think this is the vital point, is that they are not owned yet
Yeah.
that Jesus is God. They weren't there. They saw him for the Son of God. They saw him as the miracle worker, but miracle workers were all over the place in those days. Somebody said that earlier. Larry, I think you said that. They'd seen other people do other things, but this was something nobody had ever done before, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Now,
And
if you just think about it, they really had no understanding that, you know, that Jesus had supernatural power. I think Trenton had said supernatural power before. He had supernatural power over every aspect of this planet. Not just feeding people, not just healing people, but he could stop the wind, he could calm the seas. So that's where they were missing it, the point. They were missing all of that because he is God.
But the other thing I think it's really key here is that Jesus approached them, and basically his attitude was like, hey buddy, hey guys, it's me. I'm your friend. That there's an intimate relationship between them, and now they're realizing that their friend, this person that they have been working with, is God Almighty.
he's not your garden variety rabbi
Exactly.
floating around in Palestine in the first century. He's something very different than anything they've seen before, for sure. All right. I see some looks on the screen. Trent, go ahead.
I think they've also got some sore behinds and some mystified ideas because, you know, the point they've been missing is not just that he's actually God and not just that he's able to do all these things, but doing them for a purpose, and it's not the purpose that they expected.
Oh,
They say
yeah.
Messiah, and they're like, yeah, Messiah, King is here. We're overthrowing these jerks. It's time, and we're in the club. Like, we're cool too. I mean, these are social outcasts. These are, you know, poor country bumpkins from Galilee. We're finally somebody too because we're hanging on to this guy. And what does he do? He says, look at all these people. They're hungry. You give them something to eat. And they're like, no, let these losers take care of themselves. He says, no, we're taking care of them. What? You know, I just got out of being the rabble. I'm somebody now. Why do I have to deal with these people? Right? Maybe that was part of the test for Philip that's depicted in the other gospel that we had talked about last week. You know, but Jesus didn't do it because he wanted to show off that he can make bread out of nothing. He wanted to feed a whole lot of people who needed it, and that's what he had come for. You know, he had come for the compassion and the suffering, co-suffering too. He had come for the touch everybody's life. He had come for the spread it out, not just to the elites and not just to the special people, not just to the snobs. He came for everybody. And just because you're in the club, like, good for you for being an early adopter, but it's not just about you and how special you are for being in the club. And then what does he do? He doesn't celebrate it. He doesn't take the crown and the Stephanos and everything else. He sends them all home. He sends these guys off in a boat by themselves, you know, which most of them don't know what they're doing. And then he goes off back into the wilderness. What is that? He's supposed to celebrate. He's supposed to, you know, flex his muscles a little bit. He's supposed to say, here, I told you I was coming, and now's the time, let's go. And he says, no, let's go have some quiet time for a while. Nothing about what he's doing is anything that they've expected, and they're completely mystified. And they've kind of got a little dirt in the eye about their supposed status. They're finally somebody cool. And none of the rewards came along. He's not doing the Messiah thing that they were looking for. So when it says they hadn't understood the loaves, it's not just that they didn't think he could do it. It's not just that they didn't understand It's only a small part of what he could do. It's the whole shebang.
Well, you know, it's great that you say that, because again, if we go back and we just see their harmonization over in John, where, you know, he says very clearly, look at it. Look at John 6 for a second. It says, verse 14, I'll just read it. John 6:14, it says, then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, this is truly the prophet who has come into the world. Therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he departed again to the mountain by himself alone. And Trent, to your point, if he just wanted to be that guy, there you go. Boom. His earthly rule and reign and the beginning of his domination of the Roman Empire would have started there in the plain of Bethsaida. That's where it would have started. And they would, you know, years later, they would have been saying, yeah, that's where it all started. I was there that day. Right? We love to do that kind of thing. And he's like going, no, that's not what that was all about at all. So I like the way you say about the flexing. You know, we see that in the NBA so much these days, you know. And it wasn't what he did at all. He had a lot of, George W. Bush used to refer to it as political capital. And he had a lot of political capital at that very moment. And he absolutely laid it down, gave it away, walked away. So there's a lot going on in this passage. And so, you know, and I didn't hear you say this, you kind of went there with this. You know, might have, and Kurt was kind of hitting on it a little bit. Could have been a little sour grapes out there on the lake and the boat. You want to think about it that way. You know?
I mean, one of the commentaries is saying they only got halfway across the lake.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the picture that I feel like is being painted for me is to say, like, with the Lord, without the Lord, it's pretty challenging.
Mm-hmm.
You basically can go nowhere. And with the Lord, in an instant, it says basically he moved them right to where they needs to be. So in an instant, you know, am I going to go, or is my mind being renewed such that I go not by what I see, but by faith? So say, okay, I don't have enough to do this, or I don't have the things to do this, but the Lord's called me to do this, so I'm stepping forth, and then he completes it. I mean, it's kind of what we were talking about coffee the other day. It's like,
Yeah.
am I walking in faith, or am I walking in the way of the world? And these guys are doing what they need to do, and then, you know, the takeaway I feel like for us today is like, they did what they needed to do. They got afraid. Like we get afraid. Oh my gosh, the deadline's coming. We don't have the da-da-da-da-da. It's raining the night before Easter, whatever it is.
Thanks for that.
You know, we're just going to, well, what were you doing? You're like, hey, I'm praying. You know?
Yeah.
And just rest in that, and then the Lord does the rest.
Yes.
I feel like that's what I'm being encouraged by as a
Yeah.
modern day believer reading the story.
Trust.
Is like, it's uncomfortable. It's okay to be weary and tired or whatever the things are, and to even have fear.
Hey, just so you guys that aren't here or weren't here this weekend, what he kind of was intimating about is we were having the sunrise service on Sunday morning. You guys, a lot of you knew I was organizing that, a large part of it. And we got to Saturday night, and the forecast was horrible for Sunday morning. It was raining Saturday night. We couldn't
Downpour.
We couldn't put the chairs up. We had to cover the chairs in plastic.
It was a downpour.
And then the guy that was keeping an eye on him sent me a text about 9 or so and said it stopped raining. I was like, all right. By morning, jumping ahead, we had no rain on Sunday at all. It was beautiful. The sun came out. It was gorgeous. But I also didn't know, because we haven't had it in 3 years, whether we'd have a few people or a lot of people or whatever. But as it turns out, we had like 1,000 people there Sunday morning. And, you know, we did an offering, which we give a lot of that to a couple of different charities. We had the best offering we've had in like 7 years or something.
Really?
Yeah.
I think it's, well, number one, people were grateful that we were there again, but number two, I think you guys chose
We chose good
very,
cheer.
very good charities this year.
Yeah, yeah. So
I mean, it
anyway,
was so wet in the grass, guys. I took my sandals off and just stood there, and the water would cover, my toes. It was soaking wet.
yeah, I wore light tan pants to church to the event on Sunday morning, and they are just muddy to the knees. So that was not a good fashion choice. But yeah, I mean, for all the fretting and all the
But I think,
gnashing of teeth.
yeah, but I think the Lord's just saying, like, this is a normal part of the journey
Yeah,
as Christ followers.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So we got
That's
there.
uncomfortable.
Roe gets the win.
it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So other thoughts? I don't want to run away from them. That's some good dialogue. All right. So then how do we harmonize Matthew and Mark on this? Right? Sometimes you got to harmonize the gospels, right?
Okay.
So Mark 6:51 and 52 again says, well, just the latter part of 51 says, they were greatly amazed in themselves, beyond measure marveled, for they had not understood about the loaves. We just talked about that, because their heart was hardened. Kurt, you mentioned that. And now back over in Matthew, though, Matthew 14:33, this is the parallel passage in Matthew. Matthew says in 14:33, then those who were in the boat came and worshiped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. Now, let's just make sure we understand where we're at. These are both true. Right? These don't conflict. Matthew has one view, has another view, right, of the same event. I think I've harmonized those two things, because they're saying, we worship you, truly you are the Son of God. That's what Matthew got out of that. Meanwhile, Mark gets out, for they had not understood the loaves because their heart was hardened. But before that, though, it does say they were greatly amazed beyond measure and marvel. So you say it's easy. How do we harmonize that?
Well, the Mark conversations and feelings were first, and by the end of it, they came together on it.
All right. Okay. So you think you put it in a chronological, and Mark kind of was a they marveled, which maybe speaks to what Matthew was, and reflects back on how messed up they were a little while earlier, but now they've come around. Okay, so that's where you live on that.
Yeah.
All right. Other thoughts here or there? Trent, go ahead.
It's a pessimistic view, but Matthew was an eyewitness. Mark took it from Peter's preaching. Matthew points out that Peter fell in the lake.
Yeah.
Mark might not have gotten that whole story. And Peter might have tried to relay more of the overall point of the episode through Mark, through his preaching, where Matthew was getting after a different point in that situation.
I want to pause you there, because I see what you just said. I can read stuff like that in my commentaries all day. No knock on you. I'm just saying, you read stuff like that in the commentaries all the time. This one got that. This one got that. Preston was talking earlier about what he wants to talk to the Lord about. I want to understand verbal plenary inspiration. I want to understand what the writers of the gospel got from the Holy Spirit, right? Because the Holy Spirit's the author. But yet we know that they're human, and their personalities and their vocabularies and everything came into it. I want to know exactly what these guys were given by the Holy Spirit. Because to Trent's point, that's real. You can go read scholarly books all day long, and they'll talk about kind of what you just said. With nothing wrong with that. This one got that, and this one got that, and the transmission of information. Yet the Holy Spirit inspired it. So I always struggle with that. That's a tension that I've always struggled with.
Well, and these two books were written to certain audiences at a certain time too. Matthew was writing to a Jewish community. Probably, I think it was in Rome, was kind of what they guess at. So it was, he wants to bring out the "you are the Son of God," because that's something that he really needs to smack these people over the head with.
Sure.
That is very, very important for that particular group to really wrap their head around. And he's saying this whole story, this whole episode really gets at that, and you need to see it. So I'm going to rub it in your face. Where Mark is, like I said, he's more Peter's translator into Greek.
Right.
Peter spoke Aramaic and not, or at least wasn't, literate, functionally literate in Greek. So Mark was the one that did the writing, but primarily the messaging came from Peter, is what they usually say. So Peter was much more involved with the Jerusalem area, people who kind of remembered the story themselves. Maybe some of them were there. This is part of a series of preaching. He had already talked about it a whole bunch. So it was less important to try to convince that group of people, the early Jerusalem church, this was the Son of God. They kind of know that part.
Right.
They're just trying to get the facts of the story just so we have it on record.
Well, you mentioned about Peter, maybe Mark didn't get that part. I'd like to think that may be because Peter didn't want to cut it. Sorry, it's going to be kind of punished, but he didn't want to cut across the bow on this particular account because it's really about Jesus.
Yeah.
It's about Jesus, right? And while there's really interesting dynamics in Peter stepping out of the boat, it kind of a little bit overshadows, right? And you can imagine Peter going, let's just keep me out of this thing.
Well, there's also the point that it shows, well, I don't know if it shows it or not, but Peter was the one who said, I will never deny you, and he denies it.
Yeah.
Peter is the one who is repeatedly spoken to, saying, you have little faith, get behind me, Satan.
All that.
I mean, all of that stuff is done with Peter. Why would Peter turn around and it's like, I got a scab, let's pick it off again? I know that I surely wouldn't necessarily want to turn around and put myself in a bad light, but that, I'm not saying that that's the reason why, but it may have been.
Well, but please understand, I've never looked at Peter stepping out of the boat in a bad way.
No.
Because I'm like, well, I've never walked on water, not even one step.
Not at all.
So props to Pete
for
doing that. But yeah, I get where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Sure.
So sometimes, Pastor, when we're reading these Gospels, it's really easy for us studying them to go, he's the Son of God, he's the Son of God. Don't you understand he's the Son of God, right? But as these guys are going through this, I'm going to maintain they don't get it. They're not going to get it. So when we read these, it's nice for us to believe that the impact of Jesus being with these guys is so revelatory that it's changing their mindset day by day. I'm going to counter that. Here's what I think is going on with a little bit of the harmonization. You ever give a 3-year-old peanut butter and jelly sandwich who's not got a peanut allergy? And if you do, that kid, if he really likes peanut butter and jelly, he's going to eat the peanut butter and jelly, and he's probably going to be patting his foot, and he might start singing, especially if you give him like a glass of milk. So these guys regularly have episodes where they proclaim something divine about Jesus, and then it goes away later.
Yep.
We have yet to have the encounter where Jesus says, who do men say that I am? Who do you say that I am? That's coming up, right? On top of that, we're going to have the transfiguration where Jesus makes it pretty plain and clear who he is. And if we continue to consider all of the Gospels, we're going to see that when Jesus is taken into custody, all of those guys scram. They're amscrams. And then we're going to see when Jesus is resurrected, those guys are going out fishing. So when I maintain the position that these guys don't understand Jesus' true divinity until Acts chapter 2, then all of this harmonizes for me. Because here's what happens. Jesus does something miraculous. These guys get saved, and it's like an episode of maybe Gilligan's Island. These guys are going, yay, Jesus, you are great, until he's not. And then he's got to remind them again, look at who I am. And then they go, yay, Jesus, you're great, until they forget. So these guys are humans in their frailty. They don't understand Jesus' divinity until the Holy Spirit walks with them and wakes them up to that in Acts chapter 2. And then you can understand how these guys can kind of crest and fall all the time, because we have 2,000 years to look at them and say, don't you get it? Don't you get it? While they're in it, they're not getting it. We wouldn't get it if we were in it either.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, you know, and you were going through that list, and what you reminded me of was Thomas, who we really give Thomas a bad rap, right? But Thomas actually has a lot more on the ball than we do. And, you know, but he's to the point where he's putting his finger in his side and going, my Lord and my God. So that's after the crucifixion, after the resurrection, and he's still figuring it out, to your point. And so there you go. And thank you for saying that. If all of us that are on this call were his inner circle, we would be as clueless as, because to your point, Nathaniel, it wasn't something they understood. It was not anything they'd ever encountered before. And so, I mean, you know, even Trent was talking about him being the Messiah, as in the savior of Israel. Oh, they could even buy that. But to say, oh, and by the way, he's fully God and fully man. We still don't, in the 21st century, fully understand that. So, right?
Yeah.
We don't. We accept it by faith, but we don't get it. It's not something we really understand. Did you have
Well,
something?
I'm just kind of thinking all the way back and what they were going through, like what we're going through with COVID. You know, we just don't know what's going on. We don't get it. We don't get, you know. But yet I look at everybody in the boat and I can relate to a lot of what each people are thinking. And I could possibly be there myself. And I think sometimes the Lord uses his apostles and disciples as anybody outside like us looking into it.
Yeah.
When it was happening, that our thoughts were not that different initially, you know, and I think the Lord is speaking to us saying, hey, you know, look at, they were there. They saw, and they still didn't believe. How much harder is it for us that only read about it to really capture that?
You know, I love that you say that, and that's such a vital point. You read so many of the other world's holy books, right? And it's just a bunch of navel-gazing, so you know, just mind-bending stuff, right? The Word of God is I'm sorry for the phrase, is played out among humanity.
Yeah.
Right? It's played out in humanity, and God literally does his entire testimony of redemption through showing it through the lives of other people. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful picture to think about that God in his infinite wisdom and brilliance said, when I tell people about me, I'm going to have people as messed up as they are to witness it as it happens. And what an authentic way to do that. As opposed to just being, hey, let me shine all the lights on me and give you all my pearls of wisdom, and then you have to go out there and, you know, eat dirt and, you know, all stuff that people do around the world to feel holy. And instead, but here it is applied literally in front of you. And there you. That's a beautiful picture that you just said. And I think that's what, not the only thing, but certainly one of the things that sets the Word of God off away from so many of the other holy writings out there that just leave you flat when it's all. Kurt, I go back to, you started this whole thing talking about the fact that, you know, that it was both and I want to applaud that, because that's something that a lot of scoffers cannot do. They're like, well, that can't be true and that. And it literally, yes, they're both true. You know, they could struggle, and Preston was hitting on this exact point. They could at one moment be in the ditch, the next minute on the mountain, and the next minute back in the ditch, right? They had flashes of inspiration surrounded by cluelessness, just like us, you know.
They're just human.
Yeah, they're just human. Because let's face it, you know, and that's the thing what Nathaniel's trying to beat me up about right now is that, you know, I can be telling him, you know, God's going to do it, and then the next minute going, I hate this, and then be back, hey God. So yeah.
No, but I'm trying to say, I think he's saying there's grace for us in this
Oh yeah.
emotional roller coaster.
No, I'm not thanking you for beating me up
Okay.
about
Oh.
it. No, I'm digging that.
Oh, it just shows our humanness.
Yeah.
When God's trying to be us, the spiritual thing that's going on, the Holy Spirit thing, I just don't think they were getting it then.
Oh well, they didn't have the Holy Spirit then, so that was pre. So yeah, they were living in an Old Testament economy, and I think we forget that sometimes. But they were in that Old Testament economy at that point.
I think it also something that we're missing is the humor in it.
Oh, I dig the humor in it.
You know, I see all these guys rolling and rolling and rolling, and all of a sudden Jesus walks up to them. What's going on, guys? And they all freak out and just, God, let me in. He sits in a boat, and suddenly they're where they're supposed to be, and it's like, you know, he's kind of like going.
Well, you'll never hear any complaints about me about the humor in the Bible because I think there's a lot of humor in the Bible. So I've found myself sitting in coffee shops before cackling, looking at the Bible, people going, "What's that guy doing? Read the Bible, he's laughing. He needs to stop that right now." So let me do the next part because this is just the end of the chapter, and then we'll be on into chapter 6. This is on the other side of the river, the lake. So it says, verse 53, when they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret and anchored there. And when I am in the right place, aren't I?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in Mark. Okay, sorry.
Oh, you're.
I'm in Mark 6:53. 54 now. And when they came out of the boat, immediately the people recognized him, ran through that whole surrounding region, and began to carry about on beds those who were sick to wherever they heard he was. Wherever he entered, into villages, cities, or the country, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might just touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched him were made well. And so again, Gennesaret, Gennesaret's like at 10 o'clock on the lake, if you're on the Sea of Galilee. It's not too far from Capernaum, and very highly populated. It was a big, busy agricultural area. Lots of towns, lots of people. So a lot going on. And so, as I have here in the notes, his fame ensured that many were going to come seek him because this was the area where he'd spent a lot of his time. So they knew about him. And so Matthew makes the point that the men of the town sent word out that Jesus is there. So they're like, hey guys, you know, and they're letting everybody know that Jesus is back. He's been gone for a while. Now he's back. And of course, and we mentioned this earlier, John's gospel shows the people from the other side beating feet around the lake to get there because it was morning and they were expecting another meal. And so they came for that. John's got that all right. 622 and FF. When I put 622 FF, I mean 622 and following. And so after this, Mark 7, Jesus is going to leave the area. So he's kind of having one last work through there. Now he's coming back. I mean, he's going to come back to Galilee. But for now, this is going to be him, and then he's going to be gone for a while. And so this is Mark summarizing this last ministry, healing ministry in Galilee before he leaves. And I just made note about the fact that it seems like, I don't know if people remembered about the woman with the issue of blood, but they're like, if I can just touch him, then I'll be healed. And please, it's not magic, it's faith. It's always faith. It's always faith. And so I asked the question here, and maybe you guys think this is an unfair question, but I'll ask you to finish. How do we compare the faith of the disciples we just talked about and that of the people in this passage? Did they have more faith than the disciples? Did they have a different faith than the disciples? Kind of what's the story? Because they came running, expecting Jesus to do all these things. And the disciples seemed like they were kind of freaked out on the lake. So is there a difference of class there? Or is there not? None is the question.
I don't think there was a difference in class.
Okay.
I think that the disciples might have felt a little special because they were intimate with the Messiah. But I think that now there was a class system in place.
I wasn't thinking about that when I said class. So.
Yeah, but I'm saying that there was a class system.
Yes.
So there was a hierarchy, and that may have had some play in it, but I don't think so. I think that these people were all regular Joes, or as I like to say, working jerks, and they were out there trying to make a living for themselves, and they were trying to get ahead. And here's this guy coming in, and you're trying to plant a field, but you've got a broken leg, or you can't get up off of your mat to get to a pool, or there's a lot of disharmony in mankind at that time as far as physical ailments, and there was no backup plan. If you couldn't plant your field went fallow. Mm-hmm. And so there was no help. And if there was somebody who could give you help, that gave you hope. And I think that that's what people were recognizing, is that Christ was giving them a hope. If I could get close. And when he talks about the hem of his garment, and I'm a Scotsman raised by a Jew. My Jewish side of my family, when they would go to prayer, they always had a prayer shawl. And it was common back in the day to have to wear your prayer shawl all the time. And the hem that they're talking about, the fringe, that's the bottom of the prayer shawl. That wasn't part of his clothing. That was part of his spirituality. Because every Jew had them. And so it's kind of like yarmulkes now. You know that the guy's a Jew because he's wearing a yarmulke. Back then, they didn't wear yarmulkes. They may have had a turban, but they wore prayer shawls everywhere.
What did they have on those? What was on the head, Gina?
It was a fringe.
Yeah.
There was
tassels.
Tassels down, and that was what they wouldn't put their knees on the ground. They would put that shawl down and put their knees on the shawl. Mm-hmm. And the prayer shawl was like an insulation from the mundane, and now you're in the presence of a spiritual. And so when they're touching his garment, they're trying to get at the hem that was just the tassels that were underneath. So it was the hope. I think it was hope is what they all had in common.
Okay. And finally, what you said in the center of that was the idea that they had a need and they felt he could fill it.
Yes.
He could fill that need. Whatever it was. Okay. So, Kurt.
Well, I think everybody had faith that decided they believed in him. But, whether they were the disciples or not. I think the difference is the disciples were picked by him.
Okay.
And so they knew something was coming up, and that they were following him, and so it's different for them. It's not like they're the people, just living in the area. They were chosen, and so these chosen people were a little stressed out because they kind of didn't understand exactly what was going on for sure, and where this was all leading to. And so they had this anxiety inside of them that the other folks didn't, because they weren't They weren't hand chosen by him to
Yeah.
follow and do a specific job. They're still trying to figure their job description out.
Well, he's kind of teaching them as they're going along, but I like what you're saying there. Kathy?
One comparison is word was sent out to the people to let them know Jesus was coming, where the guys in the boat were not expecting that whatsoever.
There you go.
So the big contrast, they were expecting and they were looking for him and taking their poor paralytic people and dragging them out to get to him, where these guys were in the middle of a storm, but they were not expecting the Lord to rescue them.
Okay, I think you're digging into something pretty important there. And that is, it's pretty basic, right? They had seen Jesus heal before. They had seen Jesus drive out demons before. They had seen Jesus do these things. Nobody had seen him walk on water.
Right.
Nobody would see, I mean, when Preston mentioned the amount of transfiguration, I'd never seen that before. You know, that to whom much is given, much is required. You were talking about them, that's what I was thinking about, right? These guys have this role, and he's going to stretch them. He's going to stretch them. And they're gonna have to deal with things about Jesus that nobody else does, because they're going to have the role following his ascension to carry the gospel.
All waiting to death.
Yeah. Would the rank and file people in Gennesaret have understood Jesus walking on the Sea of Galilee? Their faith was based on what they had seen happen before. They knew he could do that, right? But he had done some new things. And I think you were talking about life lessons. That's a challenge for us, right? When God does a new thing in our lives, or does it a different way. I think we think God should always do the same thing the same way, because that's what he's always done. I got a little different way this time to make that happen. Like sunrise services, where it rains instead of being sunny.
Well, I mean, systems are safety and comfortable for us.
Right, we love systems. We love predictability. And God's not particularly predictable always, right? I mean, yeah, the sun comes up every day and the moon, and the world continues to turn.
Yeah.
But our own physical lives. I'll let you guys on the screen have the last call on this, because then I'm going to be done.
I love that picture of the prayer shawl too, though. You know, you talk about all the people just wanted to touch a little piece of his spirituality. For his disciples, he was their prayer shawl. As a person, you know, he was the thing that they put down to take them away from their mundane lives and give them that special connection. He was their channel to God. You know, spending time with him, following him, trying to figure out how to do what he's asking them to do, and try to be molded into what he's molding them into being. He is filling that function as a person in a personal way for that small group of guys that otherwise would be just as desperate as all these other people that are carrying their sick, decrepit family and friends around on mats.
Yeah, I like the way you said that, Trent. And as you were saying it, I was reminded of at the end of John 6, where after he had really said some tough things to them about drink my blood, eat my flesh, and people were like, you know what? Never mind.
Yeah.
We're out. And Jesus looked at the disciples, and said, "What about you? You gonna leave?" And what does Peter say? Where are we going to go?
Exactly.
Where are we going to go? I mean, you've got the words of life. And so, yeah, Trent, I mean, you're on it, right? They weren't just, I like what you said, they weren't just getting a piece of Jesus. They were all in. They were all in. And he was their future to a very real sense. And so the privilege to that is he was going to put them through their paces along the way. But he knew he was going to be their guide, and they could handle it. My goodness. Preston talked about they all scattered the night of the crucifixion. I mean, but they did come back. So, any other thoughts, people on WebEx? You guys good?
Hey, Bruce, when we talk about maybe the diversity between these folks at the Gennesaret and the disciples, I think Catherine hit a lot of good points here, which are like this. Those folks had an absolute blanket belief that Jesus could fix whatever ailed them.
Amen.
The dudes in the boat hadn't gotten there yet. Now they're going to get there, but they're going to get there at Acts chapter 2. And I appreciate you talking about Jesus putting them through their paces, because remember, now we watch him walking on the water here, ghost-like, and somebody's coming near to the boat, and Jesus kind of setting them up to recognize him. But 2 chapters before, they were scared and Jesus was on the boat. So Jesus is putting them in a variety of situations where they've got to be challenged to say, what am I going to do here? And even before the feeding of these 15 to 25,000 people, Jesus turns to Philip and says, feed them. And instead of them saying, Jesus, why are you asking me that? Or what do you think? What do you want me to do to respond? Instead of them saying to Jesus, I have faith in you, help my unbelief, because they never say that. They just are a bunch of doubting Thomases all through this until we get to Acts chapter 2. And we're going to see a variety of things here. I'm going to cap this by saying the first question you asked was based on last week's study, which was, why is this particular miracle in all 4 chapters? I would almost suggest that this study tonight has been a treatise on pushing back as to the initial reasons we suggested that it's here. Because as much as some of us have said that this proves Jesus' deity, we've just unpacked that to suggest it didn't really work for the disciples. However, that's why I'll put in evidence that the raising of Lazarus actually does do that. Because although we have 2 or 3 instances of resurrection in the Old Testament, they're almost personal and private ones. And the person that's dead hasn't been dead for 4 days. So this thing that happens is beyond anyone. When Lazarus is raised, that creates or it eliminates any disbelief that Jesus is something extraordinary. This situation, if you want to harken back to manna, you want to harken back to Elijah, you want to harken back to Elisha, we've seen the feeding of, or the endless supply of food over a period of time, maybe not to 15 to 20,000 people, but we've seen that before. What we see with Lazarus is inarguably a divine situation. So I just always want to juxtapose that Jesus is putting his guys in the hurt locker to prepare them for Acts chapter 2. And remember, too, he's already sent them out 2 by 2s. So they've had trainings, they've done miracles themselves, yet they still don't rely on Jesus for every little tiny thing the way that these folks in the Gennesaret are.
All right, we'll take the Lazarus under advisement. Certainly that was the pinnacle of John for without a doubt. I mean, that was kind of saving the big one for last. Before the crucifixion, but again, that was the book that talked about him being God, right? I mean, that was the big one. And so we get that. I think maybe, for what it's worth, what Trent said, it's almost the most mechanical answer of the first question, but it satisfies some aspect every one of the Gospels, without a doubt. It really does. But yeah, to your point, we go through all that thing, they see that miracle, and yet here we are at the end of the chapter, and they're still struggling. And you guys have all said it, they're still struggling.
Yeah.
Right? So we're 6 chapters in, and they're still struggling. And they're going to for quite a bit longer. So, matter of fact, I'm going to play all the way to the end. We get to the end of Mark. If you stop where most people think it stops, they're kind of like going, I don't know. So, Mark is not easy on the disciples, that's for sure. Well, next week we're going to start chapter 7. So I'm not exactly sure how far we're going into the chapter. I don't have it in front of me, but I'll send that out to you guys. Thank you. It's been a good conversation tonight, and both near and far. So let's have a word of prayer.